Hello, I am Reverend Irene Smith, and I'd like to welcome you to Generationally Speaking. Here at the table, we come and we discuss life issues, no matter what they might be. As we sit at the table with each generation, we all learn, we all grow, we all are inspired. Generationally Speaking. Hello, I am Reverend Irene Smith, and I want to welcome you to Generationally Speaking. It is at the table when we come and we hear from our elders and they share with us their journey. It's here at the table where we talk to the millennials and they teach us about these new approaches and their new perspectives. It's here at the table where we both can learn from each other. So I am excited today to welcome my special guest. It's funny how you meet people. You can meet people at the grocery store. You can meet people at your church, perhaps. You can meet people on your job. But I met this young man on a crowded airplane. It was packed. And there we were on our way back to Washington, D.C. And I began to be nosy, And I started asking him a lot of questions. And he began to share with me. And I said to myself, I have got to have this young man to come and be a special guest on my show. So I want to welcome DaQuawn Bruce. DaQuawn, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Reverend. I'm happy to be on your podcast.
Thank you for coming. I recognize that his time is valuable, and the more you hear about him, you'll understand that as well. So I'm going to get right into it. And first of all, I'd like for you to share with us, as I do with all my guests, those formative years, those early years in elementary and high school and going off to college. Who was this young man, DaQuawn, and where were you raised?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Chicago,
okay,
on the South Side. Most of my family's still there, and I was raised in a Christian household. Like my mom, she got saved there when I was about 2 or 3 years old, and she raised my cousin and I, along with my aunt, in church. We grew up, going to church. I tell everybody we were there like Sunday through Saturday, like every single day. There was something to do. Like we served on the worship teams. I was in all the youth ministry stuff. My mom was in the choir and on the praise team. I was in the choir. Like we cleaned the church. We did the finances, like everything. Practically lived there. That was like my second home. But it was like in that community that I really found myself, found my family, more than anything, found my faith. Which has really been the cornerstone of my life. Is those three things: family, faith, and then just having that big community, to kind of help shape and guide you and really fill in where I lacked. My father was around, but growing up in a single parent household, there was some things that I missed out on.
Right.
And it wasn't until I got my stepfather, a little bit later on, that those gaps were filled. But it was really in my church community that the father figures really came into play.
Well, let's talk about it. I heard you mention that you were raised on the South Side, and sometimes we become stigmatized, and we don't really get the full perspective of what it means, because people generally associate the South Side of Chicago with violence. But you talked about being raised by a single parent and being raised in the church. So what is, as growing up there, what do you recall, or do you recall being exposed to violence, or how did you learn to navigate your pathway through elementary, through high school, to make sure that you steered clear from those things?
Yeah, Chicago it's an interesting place. I tell everybody, like, there's no other city I'd rather be from. But the reality of the city is that your experience in a city like Chicago varies drastically based upon what side of the city you're from. The challenges that you face on, you know, the west side of the city are very different from the challenges you face, you know, on the north side, and the same with the south side. And, you know, I can remember very early having, you know, encountering a variety of issues with violence, you know, from witnessing domestic abuse situations in my family, you know, kind of dealing with the generational trauma that kind of comes from that, to, you know, witnessing friends, you know, be shot at, shoot other people, witnessing friends and family get killed, and then even myself being shot, you know, a couple years ago. Like it kind of became a norm, you know, in the community, but there was never this sense of like hopelessness, if you know, that makes sense. Like the church I grew up in was very active, and it still is very active in the community and helping, you know, reduce, you know, acts of gun violence. And it's a lot of there's a lot of community-based solutions, programs, and individuals who step up, who, you know, really try to be influential in the community and show not just, you know, the older people, but the youth, that there is something, you know, different, you know, that you don't have to, you know, pick up a gun, that you don't have to, you know, to rob people and things like that to meet your needs or to express yourself. You know, so it's unfortunately a very ever-present reality, but there was always a sense of hope.
And I'm thankful you mentioned a sense of hope, because that really leads me into my next question, and that is, I hear you talk about the church. So the church, and who else helped to shape your values as a young man?
Oh, a couple people. You know, definitely the church was on there, and you know, my personal faith shaped a lot of my values. But then also, like, my mom. You know, my mom is amazing. You know, I sing her praises all the time. But you know, she really instilled in me a lot of things, and especially around caring for people. And it wasn't just being, you know, saying it, it was doing it. You know, we lived in a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house, right? And I tell everybody, like, even though I was kind of raised as an only child, because I was my mom's only child for a while, and on my father's side, I have a whole lot of siblings. But like, it was never just us. Like, you know, it was my mom and I, my aunt and my cousin, and then every few years there was like a cohort of women living in our house. So like, imagine growing up, like, you know, like 6 to 8 people in a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, only 2 boys. Like, you know, I learned very quickly to not need a bathroom, like, and make use of the little time that you have in there. But you know, that's a value of mine, not, you know, the bathroom stuff, but you know, being open and sharing a community and bringing people, you know, in and caring for people, is a value that I learned from my mom, and it was all about watching her. You know, she worked, you know, oftentimes 60, 70-hour weeks, and on top of that, you know, is still very committed to the church and committed to her faith, and then, you know, committing herself to, you know, give and impart what she had unto these women, to teach them how to be women. And, you know, now they all are, you know, mothers and leaders and things like that. And, you know, so that became a value of mine. Like, I tell everybody, you know, my door is always open. And my friends, they will come over, they're like, yo, you cooking tonight? I'm like, I wasn't planning on it, but if you come over, like, sure, like, I'll do it. Like, because that's the, you know, that's the culture and the community that I grew up in. And, you know, so you know, my faith in my community, you know, my mom, my grandparents, even, you know, they taught me the value of hard work. My grandfather, God rest his soul, you know, was an extremely hardworking man. You know, like, he was a carpenter, and every day, really, in my early childhood years, you know, I would be with him, and we would go, and he's like, I'm working on the house. All right, so, you know, here's 3-year-old DaQuawn, like, all right, I want to go help granddaddy. And I remember he would quiz me on the different tools that he had. Okay. So I learned very early how to fix things that I broke, because I broke a lot of stuff. But, you know, there was never a day that I saw my grandfather, you know, not working to earn what he had, right? And you know, he was also a very stubborn guy. So you know, a couple years ago he got cancer and no one knew. Like he was going, he's like, oh yeah, I got to go install drywall, and we like, okay, but you looking a little, you know, slow. You okay? And he's like, oh, I'm fine. And then it wasn't until later that we found out that he, you know, had cancer, and we're like, and you doing all this, like you out here building people's houses, and you got cancer. But you know, it was those people in my life that really, you know, helped instill the values in me, you know, that I, you know, hold dear and influences my life today.
Well, you talk a lot about the tribe that surrounded you, and you mentioned your dad and your stepfather. And now that you're a little bit older, and you think about your tribe and the absence, not so present, of your father, how did that shape you?
Yeah, you know, I was angry for a long time.
Yeah.
Because like I've always held, and I still do, I always held my biological father to a very high esteem, right? And I never felt abandoned by him because, like I said, he was around, right? But I never really felt like a closeness to him, right? And so like kind of not having that. And when I would go to his house, I would see like my siblings interacting with him in a very different way. That kind of, it made me angry, I'll be honest. But at the same time, there was no wrong like that my father could commit in my eyes growing up. My mom was like, you know, she was like, I could never say anything bad about his father around him, otherwise he'd blow up. You know, but it was a hard reality, like looking around and seeing, you know, my friends with their fathers. You know, my school, I remember, you know, elementary school, they had like a father-son like gym day, right? And my mom came, you know, because my dad wasn't there. You know, he couldn't be there. And so, you know, having those types of interactions, I began to look at my mom, you know, in that dual parent role, right? And I'll never forget, I was probably about 10 or 11, and my mom said to me, you know, it was when I told her, one year I told her Happy Father's Day.
Wow.
And she said to me, she said, I can never be a father. She's like, I can never teach you how to be a man. You know, I can teach you, you know, what I would like in a man. And I can teach you how to respect women and honor women. But she's like, I can never teach you how to be a man. So don't ever tell me Happy Father's Day. And even sometimes like I do it as a joke and she's like, don't play with me like that. You know, but, you know, having that, you know, that real kind of candid conversation, and then, you know, not long after that, my stepfather coming into my life, it changed the way that I view my father, and a lot of the anger that I had toward him, and, you know, just generally toward myself, because I kind of felt like there was something wrong with me.
Right.
You know,
right.
A lot of that, all of that went away.
Right.
You know, and it helped me make room for, you know, the stepfather who came in, who, I don't want to say that my dad didn't want to be a dad, because my biological father's a great man, but I needed a dad, right? I needed a father in the house, and having my stepfather come in and letting go of that anger helped me make room for him and accept him in that role, right? And then it also helps that we look alike. So most people don't know that he's my stepfather, not my real father. And like my mom certainly has a type. But yeah, like we look just alike. And so like I remember when him and my mom were still dating, I would go to work with him and they're like, we didn't know you had a son. We thought you only had daughters. And he was like, yeah. He's like, that's my boy. It's my boy. And I'm sitting there like, that ain't my daddy. He ain't my daddy. I'm just here because my mom wanted me to be here. But no, like it's you know, it's been a journey just learning how to, you know, accept that relationship. And now my biological father and we have a great relationship. You know, we talk very often, you know, and it took for me to not look at him like the initial relationship was, he was there when I needed something, right? So if I needed money, call your dad. If I need shoes and clothes, call your dad, right? Christmas, he shows up with this giant bag of presents, right? You know, birthdays, he takes you, takes you to Chuck E. Cheese and all these places. And so it became a very, you know, kind of like a symbiotic relationship where, you know, I'm only there to get something from him, right? Never to just be his son, right? Just to spend time with your dad, right? And now, as I'm an adult, like, that's where our relationship is. It's like, you know, we're around each other just because we want to have, you know, a father-son moment. We want to get to know each other better. Like, I've learned so many things about my dad in the last, you know, 5 years that has made me, you know, love him and appreciate him more. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that, because I know for so many dads, you know, they worry so much about, you know, material things that they don't have. You know, I don't have money to do this, I don't have money for that. But hearing you say it's not, you know, yeah, those things are important, but what the child needs is your presence.
Exactly.
What the child needs is for them to know that they are received and loved as the child. And then then you touched on blended families. And blended families, that's a real issue, because now as his son, and perhaps the oldest of the children, you got to go in there and then you watch him interact with other kids, and they bouncing off of him, and you like, what?
Exactly.
You know, what's up with that? You know, and then you dealing with your emotions. So in your maturation, how old do you think it was before you were able to grow and mature and say, okay, I may understand this a little better, or, you know, I have to forgive my father in order to move forward? Yeah,
I was around 16 when when that journey began, right? But it probably wasn't until I was maybe like 18 that I really matured and made a commitment to change the relationship, the nature of the relationship that I had with my dad, right? So for the better. Because like it was literally like, I got to the point where I was like, if I'm not calling him, he's gonna call me. And my dad would call me maybe once every 5-6 months, and we would talk for maybe 5 minutes. And it's really just a, hey son, how you doing? I'm just checking on you. All right, yeah, I'm good. All right, bye. You know. And you know, it was around 18 that I made a conscious effort to be very intentional about how I approach my relationship with my father. Because I'm like, everybody, he's a very resourceful guy. And he's the guy that whenever people need something, they go to. And I realize, I'm like, the pressure that kind of is. And I'm like, you don't need one more person, you know, whether it's your kid or not, being a person that only comes to you when they want or need something. And so, yeah, like, I made that decision at that age, and it's been a lot better.
And, you know, it's good to know that you did have a full tribe around you. That included strong women, but also strong men. You know, and men who really took the time with you, your grandfather especially, and then your boost your boost dad,
my bonus father,
your bonus dad, who came in and you know, stepped in, and the way he received you, it made the difference. Even though you probably gave him a little pushback.
Oh, a lot of pushback. I was like, he was so like cool about it, because I was a mess. Like, man, that 10, 11, 12-year-old phase, I was like, yeah, I don't want nothing to do with this man. I was one of those kids that, you know, I wanted to find everything wrong with him and then present it to my mom and be like, see, you can't date this guy. But honestly, I couldn't really find anything except for he had a slight case of road rage, which was just hilarious to me. But yeah, like, I had him, and like, once I embraced him, everything changed. And I also had, you know, within my church community, you know, the men in the church really stepped up. Like, I learned how to drive from my stepfather and 2 of my godfathers in the church. I got my first job from men in my church. One of, you know, whom his name was Elder Leo, whom my younger brother is named after. You know, every Friday he gave me a job cleaning his daycare, and every Friday for about 4 years, you know, I was down there cleaning the daycare, And I remember I would just talk. We would have talks about everything, and one of the things was about sacrifice. And because I told him, I'm like, it's Friday. I'm like, can I take off so I can go hang out with my friends? He's like, you have you got a school reason you need to take off? And I was like, no. And he was like, you got a medical reason you need to take off? I was like, no. He was like, well, then I'll see you at work on Friday. I was like, what? He was like, you take care of your job, and your job will take care of you. And like getting that, impartation of wisdom from him and all these other men who, really stepped up in my early years, it changed my trajectory very much so. And that's, still my philosophy today. I tell people, they be like, that's such a old thing, an old saying. I'm like, but it's true. It is true.
So having that tribe around you, do you think that helped to curb you away from the violence that all Black children face?
Absolutely. We learned, growing up, you learn in Chicago, you learn how to fight, because if you don't, like, you're gonna get it. Like, it's like, I don't know, kids in Chicago like have like this radar where they know who can't fight, like, even if they never did it. So yeah, but like you just learn it, right? It's like, I gotta know how to fight, right? And I also, did a little bit of martial arts growing up. So I was, more than anything, I was more so concerned with disappointing my mom than, being liked. And I don't know where that came from, but it was just like, my mom worked so hard for me, like the least I can do is, not get in trouble, right? And so that doesn't mean I didn't get in trouble, because I got in trouble quite often. When it came to like violence and things like that, we had a very clear, rule in my household, like, we don't fight, and kids would, do stuff to me, and they're like, oh, you can't fight. I'm like, oh, I can fight, but I'm more afraid of my mama than I am you. So like having that, then also, after school, when all the other kids were, outside and left alone, many days we were at church. And having that structure, it did. It definitely, helped steer me away from a lot of the violence. But there are so many things in Chicago, in life, period, not even just Chicago, that are unavoidable. And unfortunately, for me and my family, violence was one of those things. From having friends die, and family members be killed, to, like I said before, a domestic violence situation. It's like there are some things that are unavoidable, but your response to them, makes all the difference.
So let's step out now, and young DaQuawn has graduated from high school and seemingly doing well, and you become a victim of gun violence. Talk to us a little bit about what happened that day. Yeah.
So I actually had just came back to Chicago from DC. It was right after I had moved here. I started my internship, and I decided to go to grad school. And I came back in it was like a 2-week period before I started grad school. So I was like, I'll be home, be with my family, things like that. And my grandmother asked me to help her. She had to go get LASIK surgery. And so I drove her to her appointment and came back, and she had a bunch of errands to do, so I ran the errands for her. And one of the last things that she did every day was take my cousins home and kind of like, babysit them until my aunt and uncle got home. And so, that day I did that, and when we got home, no one was there, so we're just hanging out outside. 8 o'clock rolls around, the whole family's outside. My uncle's on the porch, my grandmother's in the house, my cousins are outside, and the younger ones and the older ones. We have some friends hanging out, and we're all just, enjoying the summer. And I remember at some point I was playing with my cousin. She was 8 at the time, and I picked her up, and as soon as I put her down on my right side, I heard 2 loud bangs. And I just remember putting her behind me and turning, because I felt smoke and heat and all this stuff, and my hands were shaking. I thought someone threw a firework at me. So I turned to my other cousin, and I was like, hey, like, somebody just throw a firework, like, because, you know, kids like would throw like M80s at each other and, you know, and explode. And so then I just remember that my uncle was like, that wasn't a firework, they were shooting. And I turned to grab my cousin and run into the house, and I fell because I couldn't feel anything from the waist down. And there was just like this like stiffness, and then this burning sensation. And I was like, I don't know, my uncle's like, you okay? I'm like, I don't know what happened. Like, and I'm trying to find every rational excuse. I'm like, did somebody hit my car? Like, I smell smoke, like, what is going on? And I get in the house and I lay on the ground, on the floor, and like just open up my shirt and there's just blood everywhere. And I was like, oh my God, I got shot. And you know, my kind of natural response to things is like to laugh about it, and also like try to fix it. So immediately I'm like, all right, I gotta figure out how to close the wound and all this stuff. And then I remember in that moment, everything slowed down. Like the whole world went into slow motion. And I'm looking around and I see, you know, my younger cousins being like pushed into the room, and it's all happening in slow motion. I see my uncle, you know, at the door, and he's calling the police. I see, you know, one of my other cousins like pacing back and forth, and I like look up, and there was this like presence. You know, there was lights everywhere, but like I felt this presence just like comes down on me, and it felt like someone just like laid on top of me, right? And as soon as it like rested on top of me, and I'm feeling like I literally felt like it was like another body sitting on top of me, I heard the words, "You're gonna be okay," clear as day.